homes and until Hamas have been fully removed from Gaza. Well, let's focus a little more on the humanitarian situation at the moment. And we can talk from Amman to Tamara Alrifai from UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency. They look after Palestinian refugees in different parts of the world. Tamara is the Director of External Relations and Communications. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Before we talk about the aid that is going in today and the difference it might make, just give us a sense, if you would, first of all, of what the conditions are like for civilians inside Gaza right now.
Good morning. The conditions are extremely dire. We're talking about over 2 million people who live in Gaza, most of whom, 77% or 1.7 million of them, are now made displaced. Many of them moved from the north to the south, and over 1 million people are currently seeking shelter in schools and other buildings that we run at UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees. We run about 150 of these schools, so 1 million people in 150 schools makes them overcrowded, very, very crowded. Add to that the trickle of aid that's been coming in since the beginning of this conflict, or at least since the trucks have started to come in 2 weeks into the conflict, makes these people in need of everything. All of these displaced people left their homes with nothing, and therefore we as UNRWA are expected to provide them with food, clean water, medicine, and also now winter clothes, mattresses, blankets, etc. We have been doing all we can with the little aid that's been coming in. So news of increased aid and increased numbers of trucks are always welcome, even though we still call for a full ceasefire, humanitarian ceasefire, not just a pause, and a much, much bigger number of trucks every day to allow us to respond to the needs.
What's your understanding of what exactly will be on those trucks and how far those supplies might go?
We have a very clear list of what we need. People in the shelters, especially those whose homes were destroyed and therefore with no prospect of going back or leaving the shelter, need basic things every single day. Food, primarily bread, and therefore wheat flour is on top of our list. Clean drinking water, either through trucks and bottled water, but more efficient would be fuel to enable us at UNRWA to set our water desalination plants. We have these mini plants in our shelters that pump water from underground and from wells and desalinate it to offer people water. So flour, fuel, medical supplies, because our teams are still working inside shelters through mobile clinics, and also winter items, warm clothes, and everything that people would need, mattresses, blankets, etc. Having said that, the shelters are really bursting at the seams. They're overcrowded. Many people are sleeping in the courtyards of these schools because the shelters, most of them are originally schools. So we will need either tents or plastic sheeting for people to cover themselves in the courtyards.
And as we've already reflected, Tamara, this is going to last for 4 days as part of this deal. Do we know any more about, even if, can it be separated from the hostage release, from the prisoner exchange, from the ceasefire? Is there any way that the humanitarian element of this might continue beyond 4 days, even if other parts of this deal don't?
I'm glad you're asking this question, because we've been saying since the beginning of this conflict that humanitarian assistance and access to humanitarian assistance should not be conditioned by any other political or military discussions happening. So while we do welcome that humanitarian pause for 4 days, we do not believe it is sufficient for our work as the largest UN agency in Gaza. We're calling for a humanitarian ceasefire. We're calling for increased amounts of humanitarian supplies to go into the strip to respond to the needs, and not necessarily part of political negotiations. The needs are immense. The long-term impact of this war will last way beyond even a cessation of hostilities. People have lost their homes, they've lost loved ones, and mostly children are losing out on education because we're using the schools as shelters. And the psychological impact on everyone, especially on children, will take a lot of work from experts, psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers.
And I think it's worth reflecting, Tamara, as well, on the work that your staff have been doing and many humanitarian staff have been doing inside Gaza throughout this war, while also, in many cases trying to look after their own families, trying to look after themselves. And I know that you have staff members who have been killed and injured. And, this has been a difficult few weeks for the humanitarian community, hasn't it?
Very difficult. The humanitarian community is in mourning. The UN constantly commemorates, and we all think of our staff that were killed, 108 of them. And it's good to remind also that UNRWA has 13,000 staff in Gaza. Most of them are Palestinians, Palestine refugees themselves, so they're part of the community. And they're also part of the displaced community right now. So my colleagues who continue to give health services, the medics, the people who still supply insulin and other medication, plus those who distribute food, are themselves displaced, and many of them live in our shelters with their own families. So they have to deal with the distress of their own families and their children while remaining strong and remaining at the front line of the distress and the frustration of thousands, tens of thousands of people who are displaced in our schools. So they're really doing a heroic job keeping UNRWA response afloat while also having to deal with their own loss and the anxiety of their own families.
Tamara, thank you for joining us, for bringing us up to date on a lot of the humanitarian work that's being done there. We've seen the live pictures throughout the morning of once that ceasefire took hold here, and it seems to be holding well at the moment.